What are 10 things that affect real estate prices in Florida? On today's video, that's a topic we're exploring. A lot of people think they're investors, but really they're just imbeciles. So before you get embezzled, watch this video and get some ideas on things that you should look out for before you buy a property in Florida. You should know that each investor has their own criteria on what they're looking out for. But I'm going to give you what I look for when I buy property in Florida. So if you're buying a piece of land and one of them is $40,000 and the other is $20,000 and you're wondering what is the difference? Why is this piece of land worth more than the next? On this video, we're going to elaborate what contributes to land prices and a few metrics that you absolutely need to know before you start making bids on properties. Number one is fairly simple, and that is the distance it takes to get to the beach. If a piece of property is directly on a white sand beach, it's easily going to cost $3 million. If it's a beach, but it's not the best, perhaps it's going to start at about $700,000. We're talking for a quarter acre, and we're going to use this as a uniform metric throughout the video just to keep it nice and simple. A lot that has access to a beach through a canal can be as much as $200,000. But the lot across the street from it will probably be worth about $80,000 since it's adjacent to nicer properties. But a mile inland from that, you're probably going to get down to $20,000, and perhaps by the time you're 20 or 30 miles inland in Florida, that same piece of land may not be worth more than $12,000. But that's just a general idea. Let's dive deeper into some of these other contributing factors to the cost of real estate. Number two is access to city or municipal water lines. If a property doesn't have water coming in from a city or other source, this property is not going to be worth as much as one that is. How much that's going to affect the price of the property will depend greatly on a lot of factors. Do other adjacent properties have access to those water lines? How much will the city charge you to connect to that water line? Sometimes this is referred to as an impact fee. The name of this and the cost will vary greatly from place to place. You can find out everything you need to know about utilities by calling the local property appraiser in the county or city that this land is in. When you tell them the address, they'll be able to email you a cost for that specific piece of land. And it's important that you get this in email and not over the phone, because one person can tell you something and it turns out that this information is wrong, and if you don't have an email to confirm it, later on when you go to build the property, you could run into some serious hurdles. And this piece of advice is good for any time you're dealing with any type of local government relationship to building a property and the cost of doing so with utilities, impact fees, or any other type of fee that local county or city is going to have. So it's important for you to know that if your property doesn't have access to these water lines, how much they're going to charge you. In some places, you'll be able to be inside of a community where that's already in place. However, if you're buying land somewhere rural, you may be required to put a well for your own water supply. And that is the case in many places like Lehigh Acres, Golden Gate Estates, and throughout much of rural Florida. And any lot that already has that access will usually cost you even twice as much as a piece of land that doesn't have that access. Number three is access to high-speed internet. Usually, you're going to find places that have high-speed internet, also having city water, and other utilities we're going to talk about. So it's very easy to overlook if a property has access to high-speed internet or not. But you should pay close attention, because at the end of the day, when you go to rent this property or live in it, a place that doesn't have high-speed internet is pretty much undesirable. Most new developments are going to have high-speed internet. They're not going to get away with selling you a piece of land if they don't. But if you're buying property in a very rural place, it may just so be that there's no access to high-speed internet. In the case of where I live currently, there's a company called HughesNet. They're absolute garbage. If you can find something like Xfinity or Comcast, it's a much more desirable internet company. Spectrum is another desirable company, but the specific speed is probably going to vary from place to place. So if you're thinking about building a new home, you want to make sure that the area has in place or for future plans access to these services. Usually the utilities we're going to talk about are all in conjunction. It means you either have all of them or you have none of them. So it's very hard to tell you specifically how much something like internet service ultimately affects the price of real estate, but it's definitely a contributing factor. To give you an idea, an empty lot that has none of these services we're going to talk about could run $12,000. The same lot with all these services can go between $60,000 to $100,000, and if it's in a more desirable area, even upwards of $200,000. So having access to these services is something you're going to have to pay attention to keenly when purchasing a property. Number 4 is adjacent properties. If a lot has nothing built around it, the land may seem to be valueless. However, if it's got restaurants, if it's got libraries, parks, natural settings, or beaches, these are things that are going to give the lot value. But there's things that will definitely steal value from a piece of land. Nothing is quite as bad as being next to a waste treatment center, a paper mill. If you don't know what a chicken plant is, you'll find these throughout rural America, and they look something like this on Google Maps. You can smell these things for miles. What is immediately adjacent to your property is of super significance. For example, if you're next to an old, decrepit property, it doesn't matter how much your lot's worth, people aren't going to buy it if there's an abundance of lots that are not next to something like that. If all the homes on the street are over $500,000, then perhaps you could get as much as twice what that land is worth without that. Road noise is something that can definitely destroy the value of a property. If it's on a main road, not only is the road noise a concern, but so is the traffic, and people are going to think these properties are less desirable. In fact, if you travel across America, you'll notice that most large cities, the properties that are right next to the highway, they're not always the worst, but they're never the best areas. Being near road noise and light pollution isn't something people want. Number 5 is access to city sewage, or if you're going to have to end up on a septic tank. These are those mounds that houses in Florida will have. These things are unsightly and they never contribute to a community looking right. Again, if you're buying a home within a community that's gated or pre-planned, they're going to have sewage lines in place. But if you're buying a piece of property that doesn't have access to that, you're going to end up with one of those unsightly mounds in front of your property. And again, access to utilities is one of the things you're going to have to pay attention to carefully when you pick out a property or you try to understand its value. And it's one of the reasons why many people will build a home within a city, even if it's not the best neighborhood, because at least they have access to those utilities. And in many places where land is desirable, people will even buy a decrepit home to tear it down just so they can save money on hooking up to those utilities. It is believed that in the long run, there may be some type of ecological reason to force everyone who has a septic tank to hook up to a utility line from a city. It's going to cost a lot of money if that happens, and many people simply won't be able to afford doing this. Number 6 is compliance or violations. Everywhere you go, there's going to be different laws, different protected species, and there are rules related to these species that you're going to have to learn. You should always walk the lot and make sure that there's no burrowing owl nest or gopher tortoise nest or any other type of protected animal like a caracara eagle living on this piece of land. Even certain plants can be a problem, whether they're protected plants or the city considers them a nuisance and wants you to remove them. Other types of violations may be related to the county wanting you to clean up trash, garbage, litter, or dumping that's been put on your property, as well as regular maintenance like mowing the easement. Some places, like the city of Cape Coral, offer an all-inclusive package where they charge you to do all that in your property taxes. And I should mention that the more utilities that you have access to, the more likely your property is going to be getting taxed. And a lot of people will take long-term investments in areas where there's no utilities, so their taxes can be lower. Buying within city limits may have all these utilities available, but if you're not ready to build yet, the overhead cost can be very significant. Number 7 is cell phone signal. A lot of people overlook this, but in the future, I'm personally not going to. If an area doesn't have good phone signal, I'm not interested. And even very rural areas can be near a tower and pin in very well. Other areas are urban and they have absolutely no good phone signal. If an area doesn't have phone signal at all, then definitely it's going to affect the real estate value. But if an area has great internet signal, it probably won't be a contributing factor to its price. But if you're a buyer, it's good to have that. Places like Naples, Florida, where the ultra wealthy are afraid of phone signal because they're afraid of it for some reason. You can look into that, but there's people that actually avoid it. Just like with adjacent properties, having one of these things looming right over your house is probably not good either way. Anything really that's utility that's visible adjacent to your property or on your property, maybe a phone tower or some type of utility box, whatever the crap it may be, has the potential to affect your property, and you need to look at all those things. Number 8 is elevation. If you've ever heard the word elevation certificate, you already know where I'm going with this. Yes, Florida is completely flat, but your property could actually be in a flood zone. You can go on FEMA maps or county maps and really understand if it's exempt from flood zone regulations, because if your property is in a flood zone, you may have to spend thousands of dollars bringing the base grade elevation to whatever the county thinks is appropriate. And even then, they may want some type of very ugly hydrostatic flood vent, or who knows what type of other requirement they're going to come up with. So if you're buying property in Florida, you need to understand all the implications of the elevation or the base grade of that property. Being in an exempt area is highly desirable. Being in a flood zone is something you don't want to touch, and a lot of these buyers from out of state don't even know about this. Not only does it affect your building code, it can actually affect your insurance as well. Forget about what it looks like on paper. If your property floods, it's not something you really want. Number 9 is how fast can an area recover if it is a direct landfall from a hurricane, a very powerful hurricane. Giving you an example, Panama City, Florida has been hit by hurricanes back to back, years in between. However, it hasn't been able to recover from any of it because the people there can't afford it. In the case of Naples, Florida, Punta Gorda, or Miami, there's a lot more quick response cleanup efforts where after a massive hurricane 3 to 4 months later, life returns to normal. But in a place where people can't afford to fix things up after a hurricane, it can take years before the real estate market is able to bounce back after these disasters. After all, who the crap is going to care about buying your home or your piece of land if there's hundreds of them adjacent to it in the area that have been destroyed? And recovery from hurricanes isn't just how people are able to clean up, it's also how nature is able to clean up. In the case of long-term effects, like the type of vegetation, some types of vegetation just don't ever recover. Like pine trees, they look ugly for a very long time, even years after a hurricane. And let's not even get started on natural disasters like the red tide that are probably linked into hurricanes. Some areas are not able to recover for years after a hurricane. Other areas are able to clean up a lot quicker. And this is all a complicated equation between human efforts and nature itself. Many of the vegetation that you'll see in South Florida, like royal palm trees, and even the natural plants like cypress trees, are able to withstand these types of storms without really being damaged. Other parts, like in North Florida, where there's a lot of pine trees, even years after a hurricane, you can tell that a natural disaster came through. Number 10 is the local building codes. And to be honest, there's not enough time in the world to elaborate exactly on all counties in Florida and all the variations of complications that can arise from this particular factor. But what you need to know is that these building codes are going to vary from place to place, even within a county or city limits. Some of these local building codes are going to make your property very desirable for people who want to build very expensive properties and want to make sure that they don't build like a chicken plant next door. But if the home buyer or builder of the future is looking for affordability, then over-regulation can get in the way of progress. In some places, like for example Highlands County, There's so many rules and regulations, not only on building codes, but code enforcement and business licensing in general, that it gets in the way of progress. Other places like Naples are said to be too strict. However, a lot of people want those regulations because it keeps their insurance premiums down and it ensures that their property is safe and secure and that their $3 million house isn't going to burn up because the guy next door installed his own water heater and turn the power back on without filling the thing up with water. You have places like rural North Florida where you can find a place that perhaps there are no regulations in general, but if a hurricane comes through there or a tornado, your house is absolutely gone. Places like South Florida, real estate is much more expensive, but I don't see houses in Miami getting destroyed when there's 140-mile-per-hour winds. And this is one aspect that a lot of people fail to recognize. A lot of people who they think, why is Miami so expensive? Why is it so overpriced? Who would want to live in the city? I want to live out in the woods where I can do whatever I want. I don't want to see neighbors. Not everybody's an imbecile like you. There's a lot of people that understand how real estate prices work, and they understand that if you're 5 minutes from a Publix and a Starbucks in a place where you can work, that's a convenient situation that people with half a brain cell can figure out. It's going to make that property more attractive. And I'm not criticizing personal taste. When I buy a piece of land, I want to be far out in the woods too. I don't want people on top of me. I'm not criticizing personal taste. I'm criticizing your ability to understand why these properties are worth more money. If you want to be a successful investor, you're going to learn how to put yourself in other people's shoes and understand why something means more or less to somebody else. I had a property where I spent $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, I don't know how much money, making it look nice. And the person who bought it to knock it down and build something else on top of it. The only value they saw was the land and the utilities. Me being a stupid person, uneducated, I looked at the trees and the house and the way it looks and blah, blah, blah. You're going to have to learn how to put yourself in other people's shoes before you understand the appreciation, the value of properties. So when I bought my second home in Alabama, I didn't change the floors. I didn't do any of that. I put a new roof on it. I fenced in the yard. I put some trees up and some new appliances. And the floors that were nasty when I bought the house and I never liked had no effect on the price of the home when I sold it. And while on one property I lost $60,000, on the property in Alabama where I detached my emotions and my personal preference, I was able to pull a nice $65,000 profit. On the selling price, I have no idea off the top of my head how much it took to accomplish that. But at the end of the day, you can put your money into something that's going to appreciate in the eyes of other people, or you can put your money into something that to you is visually appealing, but to other people has no value. Being able to detach your emotions from your financial decisions will make you a much better investor. In the case of the property in Naples, I was the one who decided to spend the money. In the case of the property in Alabama, my wife wanted to change the floors, and I told her, no, we're not going to do this because even though you want it, it's not going to affect the selling price. And that's the beauty in having a realtor or just being a buyer who knows exactly what you're looking at, knowing intricately exactly the building codes, the regulations, what utilities and services, and in general, what makes a property be worth more and what makes another property be worth less. The information that I'm giving you is absolutely gold. So if you're investing in Florida, this video is a treasure of knowledge. At least hit the like button, give me a comment to help my channel grow, and even consider hitting up the donations or giving me a super chat during a live stream. Do something to appreciate what I'm doing for you if you're an investor, because the information that I'm giving you is not information people are going to give you on the internet. If you need a realtor, email me at southernlifeyt@gmail.com and I can link you up with a realtor, and that helps me out greatly because in the state of Florida, realtors are allowed to give me up to $500 for a finder's fee. And the realtor I'm going to plug you in with isn't just some random moron who's giving me a kickback. I know a lot of realtors down here. I've lived here for 21 years, and like everybody down here is a realtor, and I might know the right realtor for you depending on your budget, price range, ideas, what other crap you're going through. I might know the right realtor for you, not only in Naples, but in the entire state of Florida.